This story starts out on a battlefield. We see a creature screeching and the protagonist screaming back. It pins the protagonist to the ground trying to bite him, but he stabs it through the mouth. The monster still pushes towards the protagonist while screeching, until it dies. As the protagonist is wiping its blood off him, he says, "I can finally use my own power to defeat a monster." But before he could finish his sentence, someone called out to him, calling him an unawakened. We then see that there are people fighting large monsters in huge numbers. We also get to see that the person who called out to the protagonist is a man on the battlefield. The man then says, "What are you doing? If you're a porter, then you should do your job and collect the drops," his comrade says. "Do you not see the monster corpses? So you think we hired someone like you for you to fool around?" The protagonist then apologizes. They then call the protagonist a useless porter and leaves. The protagonist then explains that the world changed after the abyss was discovered. There is another dimension where monsters that only existed in fantasies actually existed. After the discovery of the abyss, people awakened transcendental powers, and with those powers, they defeated monsters and explored the abyss. Because of that, the standard of assessing someone was no longer based on personality or effort, but on your awakening rank. If your awakening rank was high, then anyone could live a guaranteed good life. However, not the protagonist. He's a porter who only carries around the cargo of the awakened, and is an unawakened one who has never even opened a status window at the age of 35. The protagonist then thinks to himself that, as long as I don't awaken, I will never be able to live the kinds of lives they lived. The protagonist turns around to let them know that he's collected all the loot from his side. But before he could finish his sentence, he is shocked to see that everybody that was fighting is dead. As the protagonist wonders how and when they died, a monster says to him, "You're the last one left." This surprised the protagonist. We get to know that this is a SSS rank monster. Asmodeus. The protagonist tries to attack, but the monster moves first, ripping off his arm. The protagonist screams in agony as the monster looks down on him. The protagonist says, "What kind of—" But before he could finish his sentence, the monster does something to him. A flood of thoughts start to go through the protagonist's mind. Is this how I die? My parents passed away in a car accident. I was endlessly bullied in school, and I lived being ignored for my entire life for being an unawakened, and my life is going to end after only carrying around cargo. The protagonist then cursing his life of being a loser, but then suddenly a voice says, "All awakening conditions have been satisfied." We then see an unknown entity floating at the top of a staircase, leading to the protagonist. As the protagonist looks at the entity, and the entity just stays still, the protagonist says to himself that he was definitely killed. As he looks back, he sees that the monster has stopped moving, along with his dead body in front of it. He thinks to himself that Asmodeus has stopped. The entity then says, "You're focused on someone like Asmodeus stopping?" The protagonist then asks who he is. The entity replied saying, "Who knows? Some call me king, but you don't have to worry about that. I shall bestow authority onto you from now on." The protagonist then thinks to himself, "King? Authority? Just what is he talking about? Did this entity make Asmodeus like that?" The entity then says, "It's not good to be so distrustful. I just admired your will and tenacity and come to choose you. However, it'd be good to think that this kind of miracle won't happen again." The protagonist then says, "Wait, what do you mean by choose me? What is going on?" The entity replied saying, "Just wait patiently for your time. A day where you will understand everything shall come. Then let's meet again. My key." A monster then appears above the protagonist and the entity, causing a bright light. In the darkness, the protagonist can hear a voice. As the protagonist opens his eyes, the voice says, "Hey, this bastard's sleeping, crazy bastard. Now he's completely ignoring us. Then we have to wake him up." The protagonist sees a hand reaching to his face, which surprises him. A man then slaps him across the face. The man then asks if he's awake now. The man then says, "You only listen when you're given a beating." We get to see that it's 3 of them, and they're all on a roof. The protagonist then thinks to himself, "Bei Hyuksu? How is the bastard who bullied me in high school here right now?" The man continued to slap the protagonist and asking why isn't he responding. The protagonist thinks to himself, "I was definitely in the abyss until just now." He then remembers that he was bestowed with authority. He then sees a status window. It says, "Name, Kim Taehyun, age 19, rank, F." The protagonist thinks to himself, "A status window? This is 16 years ago? If so, that means." The protagonist then bursts out in laughter, surprising everyone. The man asks what's wrong with him, asking if he's gone crazy. The man then curses at him, asking if he wants a thrashing. But before he could finish, the protagonist punches him in the face, sending him flying and surprising the other two. The protagonist, while crying, then says, "I too am awakened." The protagonist then wipes his tears. The other two guys then activate their abilities and charges at the protagonist saying, "You bastard, have you gone mad? You nobody." The protagonist swiftly dodges the first guy's attack and hit him with an uppercut. He then kicks the other one in the stomach before he has a chance to attack. He then thinks to himself, 35 years, throughout my entire life as an unawakened, I did everything that I could, from fundamental physical training to all the known information about abyss and monsters, knowledge of various skills, even interpersonal combat skills. As the two charge at him again, he thinks, there's no way that I'd lose to untrained thugs like you who don't even know the most basic. He then quickly took out both of them and sent them flying. He then says to himself, of course I'll have to redo physical training. He then hears someone says, what a load of bullshit. We get to see that it's the man he sent flying first. The man then asks what awakened. He then calls the protagonist a son of a bitch. He then activates his ability while saying he's dead now. A system notification pops up and says, Stone Skin, C rank, strengthens body with stones surging from the skin. The man then continuously attacks the protagonist, but he dodges every time. The man then makes a huge attack, which causes a smokescreen. The protagonist uses this as an opportunity to attack. The man tries to counter, but the protagonist dodges and lands his attack. But then something surprises him. We then see that his hands are bleeding. The man then asks what he's doing. As he prepares to block the man's attack, he thinks to himself, I hurt my own hand by hitting him? The man hits the protagonist, which sends him flying and crashing into the ground. We see that the protagonist is coughing and bleeding heavily. As the man approaches the protagonist, he says, You should have known your limits while acting up. Coming back to your senses now, are you? You lowly, unawakened bastard. What are you going to do now? Keep running like you were just now, or maybe struggle around with that awakened skills of yours. The protagonist then thinks to himself, all awakened possess a skill and a rank, starting from F rank who are almost the same as normal human to S rank with those in the territory of being called monsters. The physical abilities and skills of the awakened rises exponentially. But what I possesses, predation, F, is a skill unknown and unheard of ever before, but of the worst rank. There's no way I have a chance of winning against Bae Hyuksu who's a C rank. The protagonist then says to himself, for some reason, I don't feel like I'm going to lose. We can see a red aura enveloping his body. The man then asks, what the hell is that? No way you actually awakened that lowly Kim Taehyun. The protagonist then thinks to himself, is this predation? I can feel the magic move to my will. The man then says he doesn't know what's happening, but it'll all be over once he kills the protagonist while attacking. The protagonist then uses his skill. We see that the man's stone armor is breaking. The protagonist puts more force into it, which leads to the man's armor shattering to pieces, causing a bright red flash. As the smoke clears, we see that the man is knocked out cold. He then falls to the protagonist's feet. A system notification pops up saying, predation has been completed. As a result of preying upon a target, your rank has changed to E, and a new skill, Stone Skin, has been registered. The scene then shifts to the school clinic. We see that the nurse is in disbelief and confusion. We get to see that the protagonist carried all three of them to the nurse while being heavily injured. We can see that the nurse is beyond confused. The protagonist then explains that, after the fight ended, he moved everybody to the school clinic, and the nurse's healing ability was used to treat his injuries. But he had to lie to her, making her proceed without questions. The nurse then asked, how did they all get hurt? And the protagonist replied saying that they rolled down the stairs. As the protagonist leaves the school, he thinks to himself that, now I'm fully treated. This is great. I awakened and got revenge on Bae Hyuksu. The protagonist thinks to himself, predation, my rank that I barely managed to change after training my entire life, increased after a single fight. It may be F rank, but the power exceeds that of a C rank. I can even steal the skills of the opponents I defeat. Why did that guy King give me a power like this? Why did he make me regressed? I have countless questions, but in the end, there's one thing I have to do. Find out about predation. We then see the protagonist standing in front of a house. He says it's been a while since he came home. He thinks to himself after his parents passed away, he stayed with his uncle. As he enters the house, he says, "Uncle will be back late. Should I search for information regarding similar skills?" He then heard a noise and looked to see what it is. He sees 4 men in the room, 2 wearing masks. One is his cousin, Huang Jiayong, with a box with money in it on the ground and one sitting in a chair that looks like the leader. His cousin is surprised to see him. The protagonist asks, "Why isn't he in school?" He then sees the box and thinks, "Huang, this bastard. Even before I regressed, I remember how he wanted to hang out with the other bullies. He took all the money in the house and caused a huge fuss." One of the men then asks who's the protagonist, as Huang informed them who the protagonist is. The protagonist thinks to himself, "I didn't think that was going to be today." The man that looks like the leader then says, "I was wondering who it was, but it was Huang's cousin. If you don't want to get beaten up, don't get involved and just pass by. We'll take what we need and leave." He then calls the protagonist an unawakened. The protagonist then smiles and says, "Perfect, I want to test it." The man asks what does he mean, but was punched in the face. This surprised Huang and the other 2. The protagonist then stretches his hand towards the man while he begs the protagonist to wait. The protagonist then tries to activate predation, but a system window pops up saying, "The predation function is inaccessible." As the man lays there in confusion, the protagonist thinks to himself, "What? Predation didn't activate?" The man then calls the protagonist a crazy bastard. He then punches him in the face. All 3 of them then starts to attack the protagonist. They then uses their skills, bind, C rank, poison, C rank, bleed, C rank, all aiming at the protagonist. This causes a wind explosion. The man then says, "How dare an unawakened pretend to be awakened? He doesn't even know his place." A system window pops up saying, "The usage of skill has been sensed." The 3 men are surprised to see the protagonist's skill. Another system window pops up saying, "Bind, poison, bleed confirmed. Due to a mysterious power, resistance was successful." The protagonist then says, "It suddenly didn't work, and now it neutralizes skills as it please." As he rushes to the man, he says, "I don't know what's going on, but it sure is strong." He then slams the man into the floor. We can see that he has an ominous grin on his face, knocking out the man. A moment later, we see the protagonist standing in the room with all 3 of the men knocked out. He then says, "I guess I've learned 2 things. He then explains that the status window that's only visible for the awakened. We then see a status window showing all his stats. Name, Kim Taehyun, age 19, rank, E strength, 3, stamina, 6, speed, 5, mana, 10, fatigue, 71%, magic left, 10, skills, predation, E rank. Can prey on your desired target, stone skin, E rank. Can strengthen your body." He then returns to explaining that it details out information on the awakened, but not all of it is displayed. Until just now, mana wasn't lacking in the slightest, yet predation didn't activate. In other words, aside from the description, factors other than mana must be affecting its use. Besides that, the passive effect of the predation skill that isn't mentioned in the skill description, it resists and neutralizes skills related to abnormal conditions, such as poisoning or bleeding. Well, I can gradually confirm whether my speculations are correct, but more importantly, the protagonist then asks Huang what he's doing. We can see him kneeling down in front of the protagonist. He then shouts saying, "After seeing such an impressive side of you, I, Huang Jiayong, your cousin, am reflecting on my actions. Please forgive me this one time." He then continues to say, "Whether it's licking your shoes or barking like a dog, I'll do whatever you tell me to." The protagonist then thinks to himself, "I knew this guy was a damn fox back then, but who knew it was this bad?" As Huang starts to bark, the protagonist thinks to himself, "Well, the urgent issue isn't him, but another incident that'll happen today." The protagonist then says, "Fine, I'll forgive you. In return, come with me to get something done." The scene then shifts to a place with a sign that says, "Restricted area do not enter, authorized personnel only." We see 3 people standing together, 2 women and 1 man. One of them says, "This is a gate break?" We see monsters coming through a gate but is being stopped by a barrier. We get to know that gate break is a phenomenon where monsters appear as a path to the abyss suddenly opens up. If left unattended, dungeon disaster will occur, the man then says. It's been 10 years since the last dungeon break. The gate was suddenly created so the monsters are swarming over. One of the women then says that, judging from the monsters, if we don't do anything, the dungeon disaster is only moments away. The other one asked if they should get the neighborhood areas to evacuate. The man replied saying, "No need because we have my skill barrier, B rank. On our side. He continues to say. On top of that, the rank for this gate break is only C. As he talks, we see the monsters pushing against the barrier. He then says that means the strongest monster that comes out of the gate would be C rank. We can also see that the barrier is cracking. He continues saying. In other words, even in case of an unanticipated crisis. The monsters then breaks through the barrier and rushes towards him. The other two women tries to warn him that the monsters have broken through, only for him to effortlessly kill them with one kick. He then says, as B rankers, we are more than capable of handling it. The scene then shifts to the protagonist, and Huang running. The protagonist explains the same thing to Huang, and he asks if it shouldn't be okay. While calling the protagonist sir, Huang then says, you said the control personnel are already there, sir. Then that's a good thing, sir. The protagonist then tells him to shut up with the sir. The protagonist then says to him, you're right. This gatebreak's initial mana estimate is C rank. On the other hand, the control personnel are B rank, so there won't be any issues against C rank opponents, but only if it's actually a C rank dungeon. The scene then shifts back to the gatebreak area. We see the man inspecting the monsters' corpses. He thinks to himself, how strange, these low-rank monsters pierce through my barrier. It can't be. Is the mana overflowing from here above my rank? One of the women then shouts that something is wrong with the gate. We then see the monsters breaking the barrier again. As the three of them stand and look, we see a huge monster that breaks the barrier. We get to know that the monster is a giant ogre, rank A. As the man says that it wasn't a C rank break, but an A rank, the place erupts in an explosion. Well, this is where this video ends. If you enjoyed and wish to see more, then please leave a like and hit the subscribe button and leave a feedback. Thank you.